All right,
There you go.
great, thanks. So hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the November 13th meeting of CB2's Land Use Committee. This is the first of several meetings that we will be having for the City of Yes Economic Opportunity proposal. This will be a busy month and a half for us. It is a very long text amendment, so there's a lot of material for us to cover. But first, I just want to do some brief introductions. I'm Eugene Yu. I am co-chair of the CB2 Land Use Committee. We also have Katie Bordenaro, the co-chair as well. See her waving, and we have committee members on the screen. I think just for brevity, I will skip the introductions of the committee since this is an informational session. And so we will primarily be focusing on a presentation from our partners at the Department of City Planning. So we have with us Andy Cantu, who will be presenting the City of Yes Economic Opportunity. Thank you, Andy, for making the time to come do the rounds and share the background and details for the City of Yes Economic Opportunity. Is there a shorter way that we can refer to this one?
We've been
What
internally calling it
office?
ZEO, Zoning for Economic Opportunity.
Okay.
If you want to cut it down.
If we want to bring it down a little bit. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Andy. It's good to see you. I will turn it over to you, and we can get started. And just a quick note on just the format. We are trialing this meeting format as a Zoom meeting. So this does mean that there are no, we don't have a split between the committee and presenters and so on. So we're all in one single meeting. So I would ask, I think for just to keep things easier, while Andy is speaking, maybe if we could turn off our cameras, that will just keep the focus on Andy. And then once he's done for the Q&A, we can turn our cameras back on. I think that would be the easiest, just to, keep the focus on the screen and keep the clutter.
Eugene,
Yes.
This is Michael Levine in the conference room. Quick question. Is
Yes.
attendance being taken?
That's a good question. Thank you, Michael. Let's go ahead and take attendance. I think we should do that. Katie, could you take attendance?
I see from, oh, hold on. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I see from the committee, myself, Eugene, I see Susan Wittenberg, I see Anita Brandt, I see Donna Raftery, I see John Paul DeVerna, I see Stella Fitzgerald, I see Michael Levine. I know that Frederica has a conflict until 7, so she may be joining us later. I don't see Sean Sweeney, who's also a public member of this committee. And I see Susan Kent, our current chair. I see Janine Kiley, our past chair. I see Carter Booth, a past chair. I see David Gruber, a member of this committee and past board chair as well. Did I miss anybody who's on committee?
Just to, Carter Booth is also a member of the committee.
Yeah, I'm also on the committee, but I would object to taking attendance, and I think that you can note all the participants on the meeting, because if you take attendance, it becomes a committee meeting, and committee meetings are not allowed to be held virtually.
Oh, that's true. Thank you.
Okay.
So we retract that.
Just friendly, no attendance, just a friendly introduction to the members of the board and committee that are here.
Great, thank you. All right. With that, I'll turn it over to Andy. So Andy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Eugene. Thanks, Katie. Let me try and share my screen really quickly. I have only done this on Teams and never
Never on Zoom.
on
Okay.
Zoom. Okay. PowerPoint is virtual background. PowerPoint.
Andy, there should be a green button at the bottom of your screen,
Yep.
and then click on that, and then you should see what's on your desktop.
Yep. And then I try to go to advanced because I want to share it. Nope. Sorry. Sorry, guys. This is different
No problem.
from when I practiced this earlier. Okay, let's try this.
You got it. There it is.
All right. I can't see my notes. Let's see. Okay, what are people seeing?
We actually see your screen with the notes.
You see my screen with the notes. Okay.
I wonder if there's a presentation mode.
Yeah, I'll get it for you. One sec. Mark
Sorry,
said he's
Mark?
going. Mark left the room to try and fix it. So he'll be right back. He went into his
Okay.
office.
All right, so now we see the slide view, just the slide.
You see just the slides right now.
Yes,
Right.
can you still
You
see
do-
your notes?
I can see my notes.
Okay, so yes, we can see the slide, just the slide.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Like Eugene said, my name is Andy Cantu. I'm a senior planner here at the Department of City Planning in the Manhattan office. I'm joined by my colleague, Ben Huff, who's in the transportation division. He's also a member of the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity team. Again, a mouthful. I'll try and shorten it. I'm here to present City of Yes Economic Opportunity, this second of 3 citywide zoning text amendments. This proposal is pretty content dense, to say the least. My presentation, I'm hoping it's about less than 40 minutes long. And then my goal is to leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So as you've hopefully heard, City of Yes for Economic Opportunity is one of 3 citywide initiatives to modernize and update our city's zoning regulations to support small businesses, create affordable housing, and promote sustainability. Again, part of Mayor Adams' vision for a more inclusive, equitable City of Yes. And economic opportunity, again, is the second in a series of citywide reforms. The other 2 proposals, City of Yes for carbon neutrality, which you've already weighed in on and is almost at the end of public review. And coming later this year, City of Yes for housing opportunity, which is expected to start public review sometime in the spring. So after more than a year of getting in front of as many audiences as we can and soliciting feedback and questions about these proposals, we're now in the process of going before every community board in the city, all 59, in the formal public review period. And this process will culminate in a city council vote sometime in the spring of 2024. So what are we here for? So knowing that our zoning was in desperate need of a refresh, we've been on a listening tour for much of the last year and a half, asking primarily small business owners, but also chambers of commerce, business improvement districts, the bids, industrial service providers, and other stakeholders across the city about the ways that zoning might be sort of getting in the way of establishing or expanding small businesses. And we've met with over 100 groups, held 5 public information sessions, and have heard from countless New Yorkers about the challenges that they face. And this proposal has been shaped by those concerns. And a lot of what we heard is that New York City can be a really tough place to run a business, and dealing with government regulation and bureaucracy. Hear it from me, the source is often frustrating, slow, or confusing. And all this red tape makes investing in one's business hard and contributes to our city being a little less vibrant, having fewer people able to start that business that they want to, having one more vacant storefront, one more business that has to leave their neighborhood or the city entirely. So our overarching vision for this initiative is just to make sure that our zoning works for our economy and not against it, and to have a zoning regulation that's simpler, more adaptable, and more modern. Now, these are citywide proposals, obviously, and they apply to all 59 community districts. But what does this mean for CD2? This is a snapshot of Community Board 2's economy. There are about 172,000 jobs in the district spread across a range of sectors. The district also has approximately 4,900 storefronts, with the highest concentration in local services like food and retail. And about 840 of those storefronts are vacant, about 17%, which is a rate that's a lot higher than Manhattan and the citywide averages. In part, these proposed zoning changes would make it easier to fill those empty storefront spaces by giving businesses more certainty on where they can locate and what they can do with their space. So how do we achieve zoning that works better for the businesses and the community? We've developed 18 individual proposals that are broken down into 4 thematic buckets. First, goal 1, we want to make it easier for businesses to find space and grow. The main way we propose to do this is by lifting zoning barriers so businesses can be closer to their customers. Goal 2, we want to support growing industries by reducing obstacles to emerging business types, which can help those businesses thrive across the city and create jobs. Third, we want to foster vibrant neighborhoods by ensuring that businesses contribute to active, safe, and walkable streets. And lastly, goal 4, we want to create new opportunities for businesses to open in the future by creating new kinds of zoning tools that can boost job growth and business expansion. So I'm going to go into each one of these 18 proposals. There's a lot of information here, obviously, including a lot of maps showing how these proposals interact directly with CD2. And I'll be sharing this presentation with Mark and your chairs, who can then share it with all of you for your review tonight. And I did send this earlier, so you already have it. So goal number 1, we want to make it easier for businesses to find space and grow by lifting zoning barriers so that they can locate closer to their customers. In most cases, our zoning rules governing businesses haven't been updated since the early 1960s, and we think it's long past due to update our zoning to reflect and respond to today's economy. Proposal 1, lift time limits to reactivate vacant storefronts. So today, non-conforming storefronts in most residential districts that become vacant face an arbitrary 2-year time clock for reactivation, or else they have to remain vacant, which is a direct contributor to long-term vacancies. What we're proposing to do is remove that 2-year time clock for all non-conforming commercial storefronts in all residence districts and historic districts so that vacant storefronts can be reoccupied. This is especially relevant to CB2, where you have a lot of older non-conforming businesses located outside of commercial districts that have been in operation for, in many cases, since before zoning was put in place. And this change would ensure that those storefronts, if they were to close or go out of business, can remain active as businesses. So on this map, you can see in CB2 where this proposal would apply, with the proposed expansion areas highlighted in green. Proposal 2, simplify rules for business types allowed on commercial streets. So in many places in the city, we have similar zoning districts like C1 and C2 commercial overlays that in many cases are located along the same corridor or even on opposite sides of the street, yet allow different kinds of businesses. And this is really sort of a confusing set of rules that routinely holds back business location or expansion. we're proposing to simplify the differences between similar types of zoning districts to make it easier for businesses to know where they can locate. So for example, today you can sell bicycles in both C1 and C2 districts, but you can only repair bikes in C2 districts. This proposal would eliminate that distinction. And as part of Proposal 2, we're also removing restrictions on certain uses allowed in C4 and C5 districts, like dance studios, from locating on the ground floor. Today, many of those uses are restricted to upper floors only, and that's really a vestige of wanting to create more active streetscapes. But we believe that that rationale is now outdated, and many of those restricted uses do, in fact, contribute to active street frontages. Proposal 3, enable small-scale clean production. Currently, commercial districts permit a limited range of production uses, but exclude many kinds of clean, small-scale production that we think are appropriate to locate in storefront or office settings. Today, a lot of maker businesses that rely on foot traffic or prefer to locate near customers are only permitted in the less accessible manufacturing districts. So we want to allow businesses like pottery studios, bakeries, coffee roasters, jewelry makers, 3D printers, and things like that to be able to locate in commercial districts instead of only being allowed in M districts. These uses will be subject to relevant environmental standards to ensure that they're appropriate to locate near residences and other businesses. Proposal 4, modernize loading dock rules. So if manufacturing businesses want to move into an empty building, our rules may require them to add additional loading docks, even if they don't need them, and even if the building can't physically accommodate them, which we think contributes to vacancies in these older loft buildings. The proposal here is to remove the mandate for new tenants in existing buildings to provide additional loading berths based on a change in use. This will allow the adaptive reuse of older commercial buildings over time by not mandating that a business tear apart the ground floor of a building to provide those new loading docks. And this would bring our loading dock requirements in line with our parking regulations, which don't change when buildings go through a change of use. Proposal 5, enable commercial activity on upper floors. So today, zoning allows for some buildings in some districts to have a mix of residential and commercial uses, but often restricts businesses from being able to use upper floors. We think this limits opportunities for new mixed-use buildings or for older buildings to adapt. There are 2 parts to this proposal. One is to allow commercial uses on the second floor of a residential building in all commercial districts, including neighborhood commercial overlays. And the second part is to allow commercial above or on the same level as residences in C4, C5, and C6 districts. I want to note that complete physical separation and acoustic separation between uses, including separate entrances and elevators, will be required. Proposal 6. Right now, our zoning hasn't updated the terms it uses to classify businesses in more than 60 years, and it's full of antiquated terms like shoddy manufacturing and typewriter repair. This makes it hard for newer business types like cell phone repair shops and things like that to know where they can locate. So in this proposal, we're proposing to simplify and modernize those terms. So using updated terminology based on today's economy and update special district rules to refer to those new classifications. So for example, in this diagram that's on the screen, these different sort of retail and local service uses that are in 4 different use groups today are being compressed into a single use group 6, which includes all retail and services. On to our second goal. We want to support growing industries. Each of the industries highlighted here, urban agriculture, life sciences, nightlife, amusements, and home-based businesses, face either ambiguity or outdated restrictions in our zoning, and we want to address those obstacles so that we can help emerging business types thrive and create jobs. Proposal 7, clarify rules to permit urban agriculture. So today, while agriculture is allowed outside or in a greenhouse in any zoning district, indoor agriculture is only allowed in manufacturing districts. So businesses that want to operate indoor agriculture facilities like vertical farming within commercial areas face uncertainty under today's zoning rules. So in this proposal, we want to clarify how enclosure rules work to ensure that businesses with passive outdoor spaces like florists can operate, and clarify that indoor agriculture is allowed in C districts so more food can be grown closer to communities. Proposal 8, life science. Currently, life science labs face confusing and outdated rules that slowed the development of new facilities, including outdated terms that define a lab. This ambiguity in zoning can make building new labs difficult or make it impossible for labs to locate near important research centers. So in this proposal, we would make it clear that labs without the potential for environmental hazards are appropriate in office settings. And we'd also expand where the existing commercial life science lab special permit can be used so that labs are able to locate closer to hospitals and universities. Proposal 9. Right now, restaurants and bars face a set of confusing regulations on where they can host concerts, dancing, comedy shows, or open mic nights. For example, it doesn't make sense to us that you can't have a 50-seat comedy show that advertises at showtime, but you can have a 200-person live music venue that doesn't advertise at showtime. We're simplifying the rules so that they're based on the size of the venue rather than the activity, so that you'd only see small venues in neighborhood commercial corridors and larger venues in denser areas. We think this rule change will streamline enforcement and free up resources at DOB, DEP, and our other sister agencies so that they can go after truly bad actors. So to illustrate the current zoning in a little more detail, today, a restaurant or bar is allowed to have live music in any commercial district, whether that live music takes the form of background accompaniment or a full band with amplified sound. But in some places, that restaurant might be prohibited from having the band charge a cover or advertise at showtime, or from hosting other forms of live entertainment like comedy or open mic nights. And in many cases, it's still illegal in certain areas to dance in a bar or restaurant, even though the city council repealed the cabaret law several years ago. This proposal aims to clarify when a bar or restaurant can host dancing or other forms of entertainment with posted showtimes or cover charges by regulating businesses, again, based on capacity and not the activity. This means that live comedy, DJs, dancing, and ticketed events would now be treated the same under zoning, but venues would have their occupancy limited to 200 people, which is roughly the size of a typical storefront, when locating in neighborhood districts and commercial overlays. And again, those bigger venues would be limited to central business districts like Midtown and the city's industrial areas. Now, we know that sometimes bars and restaurants can create concerns in the community, and so we want you to know that we've been working really closely with our colleagues over at the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and other agencies to protect quality of life for New Yorkers. DOB and the FDNY rules around occupancy and safety, DEP regulations for amplified sound, and community board stipulations during the liquor licensing process all help to ensure that venues are being good neighbors. And programs like Mend NYC, again, can step in to mediate any lingering issues that may arise between nightlife venues and the community. Proposal 10, amusements. So zoning currently has outdated terms for defining experiential amusement businesses like virtual reality or children's arcades, and often restricts those kinds of businesses to Coney Island or the city's industrial areas. So here we would simplify and modernize how zoning treats amusements and recreational activities to make clear that these businesses are allowed indoors and at a small scale in neighborhood commercial streets and at a larger scale in office districts. Proposal 11, home-based businesses. So many New Yorkers start their businesses in their home, and zoning allows for a wide range of home business types. So today you could be a lawyer or a music teacher and regularly have clients visit your home, but you couldn't be a barber or an interior designer. The pandemic really changed how New Yorkers work from home, and we think it's time for zoning to keep up. We're proposing to enable entrepreneurship with modern rules for home-based businesses by removing the list of currently prohibited business types, expand the size allowance from 25 to 49% of a home, and allow up to 3 employees to be associated with the home-based businesses. At the same time, we'd keep in place important safeguards like noise and environmental rules and signage and retail limits to ensure that home-based businesses are still being good neighbors. Our third goal is to foster vibrant neighborhoods by ensuring that businesses contribute to active, safe, and walkable streets. Economic vibrancy isn't just about what occurs inside a building, but also about how a business interacts with its surroundings. And inconsistencies in existing streetscape regulations, or in a lot of cases, just a total absence of rules, means that there's no way to curb some of the worst outcomes of business activity spilling out into the curb or creating conditions that are unpleasant or unsafe. So with Proposal 12, we would introduce design rules that ensure buildings contribute to their surroundings. So right now, except for most of Manhattan and some special districts, most areas of the city don't have any zoning rules guiding street level design. And this can lead to streetscape conditions like really long blank walls and drive-throughs that break up retail streets in large parts of the city. Not so much a concern for CB2, but it's still out there. So what we're trying to do is propose a consistent, easy to understand baseline set of rules for commercial ground floor design, ones that are more robust in areas with more pedestrian activity and more relaxed in the city's more auto-oriented corridors. This new streetscape framework has 3 tiers, which are cumulative and would apply to new construction buildings and significant alterations. Tier A would apply in most commercial districts or in light industrial districts where residences are allowed. Here, blank walls more than 50 feet would require some kind of mitigation, whether that's a mural, planting, or some kind of transparency. Parking would have to locate to the side or the rear of a lot where feasible, and new drive-throughs would have to go through a discretionary process at the BSA. Inside the transit zone, Tier B would apply and require the 3 conditions of Tier A, along with additional considerations such as ensuring that storefronts maintain a minimum 50% transparency. Tier C consists of designated streets and special districts, as well as other designated geographies. In these places, all of the regulations of Tiers A and B would apply, and unique elements of the special districts would be retained, so enhancing the design of those unique places while rectifying a lot of the inconsistencies that make it hard for businesses to know the rules. And this new framework is really designed to be, again, simpler, flexible, and in most places only intervenes to prevent the worst instances of building design that diminishes the vibrancy of a street. Here in this map, you can see how the new streetscape framework would apply to CB2. And as you can see, most of the non-residential streets are either Tier C, which have the most prescriptive streetscape regulations, or Tier B. Proposal 13, reduce conflicts between auto repair shops and pedestrians. So today, auto servicing and repair businesses are typically treated as industrial uses and located far from retail streets and residential neighborhoods. But some exceptions exist that allow auto repair in stores to spill out onto the sidewalk, creating potentially unsafe concerns for pedestrians. We're proposing to rationalize and consolidate the range of auto service uses and zoning into 2 categories, light and heavy vehicle repair and maintenance. Heavy vehicle maintenance must be licensed by the state DMV and would continue to be allowed in industrial areas, while light vehicle repair could locate in most commercial districts through a BSA special permit. Proposal 14, encourage safe and sustainable deliveries. So today, zoning does not allow for delivery activity within buildings except in industrial areas. And this forces that activity to occur on sidewalks and in streets and most other commercial areas. And that incentivizes these really big distribution hubs that need much larger trucks rather than smaller vehicles and bikes. What we're proposing to do is create a new type of use called a micro distribution facility and allow those businesses to locate at a very small scale, 2,500 square feet in C1 and C2 districts, and up to 5,000 square feet in higher density commercial district. We think this would encourage deliveries to shift to alternative modes of transportation and regulate the creation of local hubs for safe and sustainable deliveries to occur. Our fourth and final goal is to create new opportunities for businesses to open by establishing new zoning tools that can boost job growth. Our zoning regulation contains many tools that can be used to initiate a discretionary process to change an area's underlying regulations, including City Planning Commission authorizations and special permits. So as we're seeking to modernize our zoning to support business development, we also need to update our zoning toolkit by creating new kinds of discretionary zoning tools and new kinds of zoning districts so that businesses can have better access to pathways that can enable their expansion. Proposal 15. Facilitate local commercial space on residential campuses. So right now, many large-scale residential developments, like NYCHA campuses, are zoned exclusively as residence districts, meaning that local retail and services, like bodegas, can't easily locate there, and that places residents of these developments further away from daily needs. With this proposal, we're proposing to create a CPC authorization to allow up to 15,000 square feet of commercial space in existing or new construction on a large-scale residential campus, which would give residents greater access to necessities or the space to grow a business. Proposal 16, create a new process for allowing corner stores. So today, just like the previous proposal, some portions of the city are not within walking distance of a local retail store, and zoning often has no pathway to allow a new locally serving business to operate. With this proposal, we're creating a discretionary pathway, another CPC authorization, to allow new corner stores to locate in a residential district, provided that the store doesn't generate any environmental concerns or traffic congestion. And these corner stores would be limited to 2,500 square feet and would have to be within 100 feet of an intersection. So they couldn't be located in the middle of a residential block. Proposal 17. Today, in some places, businesses lack the ability to waive certain non-FAR related zoning rules. So for instance, film studios often struggle to build sound stages because they bump up against certain zoning rules like a maximum street wall height. Or a clothing store might want to expand to occupy an empty storefront next door, but finds that size limitations or location rules prevent them from doing so. So here, we're expanding the zoning toolkit so businesses can initiate a process to waive some zoning rules on a case-by-case basis via a CPC special permit. And finally, Proposal 18. In some instances, it's our zoning districts themselves, not those discretionary pathways to modify them, that are obsolete. And this is particularly true of our city's manufacturing or M district zoning designations. So currently, low density options, physical design rules, and parking requirements make it almost impossible to build loft-like buildings, even in areas where they already exist. This proposal will create a range of new job-intensive zoning districts at a range of densities and heights. And just to be clear, this action wouldn't map any of those new districts. They would just become available for applicants to map in the future through another ULURP action. So we've made it through all 18. That was a lot of information. The most important thing we really want you to take away from this is that this set of proposals is targeted at streamlining and modernizing zoning so that CB2 and every other district can grow jobs and small businesses. And so to help put all of these proposals in more context for your district, I'm going to show you a few maps which hopefully make these proposals clear in terms of where they apply and in which zoning districts. And again, I'm going to share this presentation if Mark and Katie and Eugene haven't done so already, share it with all of you so that you get to take a look at it more closely after the presentation. So this is a map of where the proposals affecting C1 districts would apply. And this is the list of the proposals that would affect those C1 districts. So for example, proposal number 2, allowing the same uses in C2 districts would apply to all of the areas that you see in orange. And within C2 districts, here are the proposals that would apply. C4 districts, not very many, and CD2. Here are the districts where these proposals affecting C6 districts would apply. And within residence districts, here are the proposals that would apply. And within manufacturing districts, these are the proposals that would apply. And lastly, while this proposal seeks to make changes to underlying citywide zoning regulations, there are a few ways that the proposal also seeks to make our sort of overlapping and sometimes contradictory set of rules for special districts easier for businesses to understand. And those are mostly focused, again, on those enhanced corridor design rules. And here's an overall look of how the citywide proposals that don't sort of affect a specific zoning district would apply to your neighborhood. So in addition to a copy of this presentation, I highly, highly encourage you to check out the Economic Opportunities website, which has links to everything from high-level explainers, as well as the proposed zoning text with annotations, and links to all of the previous presentation recordings and accompanying slide decks. And you'll also find lots of letters of support from a wide range of organizations and businesses. So I know CB2 is extremely well-versed in how to share feedback in the public review process, but I just wanted to highlight one resource, which is that because there are so many distinct proposals, the teams created this optional worksheet for community boards to fill out, which allows you to indicate on each of the 18 proposals which ones you support or not, and a space to request any modifications or notes, if any. So again, just to reiterate, since this is a non-ULURP application, the CPC has a little bit more flexibility and will accept feedback past the standard 60-day review clock, which will end at the beginning of January. But we highly, highly encourage you to submit your recommendations as soon as possible so that we can collate them and get them packaged and have the commission start reading them. And again, this process will culminate in a city council vote sometime in the spring, which hasn't officially been calendared yet. And with that, I'm happy to welcome any questions, and thanks for your time tonight.
Question?
Great. Thank you, Andy. Yes, go ahead with the question.
Andy, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation as usual. One thing confuses me, and that is the lack of what I'm seeing, and I may be misreading it, performance standards for uses that will now be permitted, that will not be permitted before, that were not discretionary actions. So can you describe how performance standards would be considered for those new use locations that are not subject to discretionary review?
Right. Thanks, Michael, for your question. So all of those uses, those new uses that would be allowed as of right, would still be subject to environmental performance standards. And I'm trying to find that particular slide. Right. So, for example, home-based businesses and this type of small-scale clean production would still be subject to right to know and ABC environmental standards to make sure that they're appropriate to locate near businesses and wouldn't be creating any new nuisances or unintended negative spillover effects.
Is there an individual environmental review required, or is it really just as of right?
For this particular proposal, it would be
Yes.
as of right.
And again, the Department of Buildings would make sure that all of the performance standards are being correctly addressed.
Yes, DOB in most cases would be the entity that's ensuring compliance.
And it would require a change in the certificate of occupancy?
If, I mean, just like in any case, if any, space, storefront is changing its use, it would require a change of occupancy.
Okay, thank you.
Are you talking about, are you referring to a more specific case? Like if,
No, I'm just thinking in general, if there is the addition of a use that was not permitted before, for example, to have certain industries above residential, would that require a change in certificate of occupancy? And I think your answer is yes.
let me get back to you on that specific case. I don't want to, I think the answer is yes, that it would require a change in the C of O if the use is in fact changing. But I don't want to give you the wrong information.
So let me just say, I would encourage that and have that as part of our discussion. Thank you, Andy. Excellent presentation.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you,
Most
Michael.
of these, just real quickly, most of these changes apply like to the ground floor. So I don't think you would find a case where it's happening above an apartment.
I actually thank you for that, Ben. I have kind of a follow-up question on that, on what Michael was asking. So I think it's related to proposal 5, when we talk about enabling commercial activity on the upper floors. And there is part of this that says there's a physical separation. Right there it is on the slide. So potentially noisy uses must have a minimum 15 feet of separation or materials to attenuate any excessive sound. So would DOB again be the agency that determines that? How would that, would this be considered a change of use, for example?
Yeah, so we see this mostly applying to new construction,
Okay.
just simply because it is labor intensive and quite expensive to be able to do something like this. But where there is an alteration, that would have to also go through the DOB permitting process, and they would have to sign off on that type of sound attenuation.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that there may be some cases where an alteration might be possible. I mean, short of new construction, that there may be alterations that could be done to let this type of separation, to have this type of separation for this activity. So, but it sounds like the focus, like you're saying, is on new construction. Okay, thank you. Looking at the questions, Frederica, I think you were next.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Frederica.
I'm wondering if you could summarize briefly, but in detail, all the areas where the community board's input will be reduced as a result of the City of Yes Economic Opportunity Text Amendment.
let me see if I understand your question. So which of these proposals would sort of take away the ability for the community board to weigh in on a discretionary action? Is that what you're
Well,
asking?
discretionary or not, but there's, there's BSA variances, special permits. There's other areas that the community board's input might be kind of sidelined. And I'm interested to hear step by step of the 18 proposals where community boards would have less opportunity to recommend than they do now.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I think in most cases, we're actually creating new opportunities for the community board to weigh in, either through new BSA or CPC authorizations or special permits. And in most cases where we're making something as of right, like what you see on the screen right now, like locating commercial above residential, that's something that in most cases isn't allowed today and is something that the community board doesn't weigh in on even in a discretionary process. So I don't know if I can, right? I don't want to say, absolutely, this is not taking away sort of any authority of the community board to weigh in on any sort of application. But I think sort of across the board, it's more about putting more power into the hands of the community board.
Okay, I'm not quite sure about that. And if you need a couple of days to get back to us with a kind of a step by proposal analysis of whether we have more or less input, I think that would be useful for us. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to put that together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frederica. Katie, I think you're next.
Hello?
Oh, hey, David.
Did you call on me? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was calling on Katie. I think Katie
Oh, okay.
was
No,
next.
that's fine. That's fine.
Oh, okay. All right. Katie? And you're next after Katie, David.
Okay, fine.
Katie, I think you're muted. You're still muted. All right, let's go to David, and then we'll go back to Katie.
Okay. Well, I think that the city planning commission and the city in general is definitely on to something. Much of the zoning is antiquated, and we've moved on from many of the requirements. But there are some things that we were presented tonight. I mean, I've heard this presentation before, but there's just an enormous amount of information that needs to be thought out and really looked into. It seems that a city council vote in the spring on this is really a short time, because it looks like a complete revamping of the zoning resolution. And besides all the other stuff community boards do, this is really an important thing. Let me ask you two specific questions. When you talk about C1 zones, you talking about pure C1 zones or overlay zones, or both?
You mean about proposal 2, where we're seeking to sort of like collapse
Well, throughout the presentation, you talked about, I mean, it was very hard. You went over it very fast. I was trying to take notes, and it went over it very fast. But throughout the presentation, you talked about things that would be permitted in C zones and C1 zones, and music and lots of stuff. Not just proposal 2. But when you talk about C1 zones, are you talking about overlay zones or just pure C1 commercial zones?
They would apply to both.
Yep.
Okay, so that really needs to be thought out, because, for instance, you talked about bakery production being allowed in a C1 zone, but we've had situations here in a C1 overlay zone. A bakery was doing production, but they had a huge wholesale business, and they were they were cooking, baking, I should say, all night long. The trucks went out early in the morning, 4 o'clock. Lots of trucks went out from this facility. Neighbors, because the C overlay zone is really a residential zone and really governed by the residential, residential priorities of that zone. And I'm just bringing one thing up. There were lots of them. And this bakery violated, at the time, the C1 overlay zone, because it was a wholesale facility. It was a bakery facility. But you seem to say that would be allowed under the sweeping changes that are being made by the city of Yes. Did I get that correct? Or is that something that we could talk about after we discuss it at the community board?
Yeah, so I believe the proposal, so I believe today, under today's regulations, you could operate a bakery in a C1 or a C2 overlay or an underlying C1 or C2 district, subject to a pretty stringent size limitation. And this proposal would just be expanding that size limitation. Ben, I don't know if you have any particular details, but we can get back to you on sort of like the exact change that's being.
Yeah, if you have the address of this bakery you were talking about, that might be helpful for us to look
Well, it was
up.
on the corner of Bleecker and Christopher. They've since gone, but they were running trucks. They were producing breads and pastries and stuff, as bakeries do, and they were selling them to other stores, which bakeries do. Nothing wrong with that, but in an overlay zone in a residential area, it was out of control because the trucks were going out all night long, because bakeries deliver early in the morning. So trucks were going out at 3, 4, and 5 o'clock in the morning. People were like going crazy. A lot of this stuff, really needs to be analyzed. And I just want to say the city is not known for always thinking things out before doing. I don't want to get into a lot of that now, but to move on to something else quickly.
Can I just answer that question
Sure,
a little bit on the C1 and C2? So the clean production, the intention of it really is, say, a small coffee shop that serves baked goods would be able to bake those goods on the premises. And so in C1 and C2 districts, it would be up to 5,000 square feet. And that's typical of about 2 storefronts. And then for the higher commercial areas, C4 to 7, it's up to 10,000 square feet. Mm-hmm. And the idea of that is to, by limiting the size, the hope is that it's not creating like large volumes of trucks that are going in and out. It's more allowing them to support and produce on site.
Okay. But we've had lots of examples, and I don't want to belabor it, but bagel shops, for instance, that are under 2,000 square feet, pumping out bagels that they sell to other places, and the trucks would line up early in the morning to get their bagels from other retail outlets. These things really have to be, as I said, looked at. And there was so much here that, we could just have 20 community board meetings until the spring to look at this. I want to ask you something else. In proposal, there are places like on proposal 15 where it says that CBs have approval. Does that mean final approval? Does that mean if we disapprove, something doesn't move forward? Is this City of Yes giving a little bit more discretionary approval to community boards, or is this like another community board recommended approval?
Yeah, so the new authorizations and special permits that would be created would be similar to those that exist today. So they would be referred to the community board for between 30 and 60 days. But ultimately the community board's recommendation would just be advisory.
Okay, so this City of Yes is not saying we're going to give the community board some decision-making authority. Is that right?
It's expanding the universe of discretionary approvals that you already look at on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you. We'll guess we'll have a lot of work, Eugene and Katie, the next 6 months. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
I think you can hear me now.
Yes, Katie, we have your sound now. So do you want to?
Okay, thank you. I have a very specific question. because something about what you were talking about, agriculture. Does that include the growing of marijuana in commercial growing of marijuana in this zone proposal?
So this proposal that you're looking at now, proposal 7, doesn't discriminate on the type of agriculture that's going on, but licenses to grow and produce and distribute and cultivate marijuana has to be done under a state approval process, a state license. So this proposal would simply enable, people who want to grow marijuana to locate in certain districts, but they would still need that state license in order to actually operate their business.
We have a very active cannabis licensing committee, and we're learning all about it, but thank you for clarifying.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Susan Wittenberg.
Hi, thank you. I'm just going to sort of get to 2 questions. To go back to what you talked about a few minutes ago, which has to do with the 15 feet regulation of a new business from residences. I have lived in a mixed-use building in Soho for a long time, and 15 feet is nothing. 15 feet, you have to be aware that if you have a business above you or below you, nevertheless, on either side of you, if it's 15 feet away, you are hearing the business. And businesses have people, employees that come in 24 hours a day sometimes. And 15 feet does not protect people who live in residences from the noise of a business operating that close to them. I don't know whether you took into consideration above and below, or the 15 feet is just on either side. But with 12 and 14 foot ceilings, 15 feet is just above you. So that seems very filled with problems based on things that we've lived with here. And also, Katie mentioned the pot growing, smells travel too. And so bringing in certain types of light manufacturing that I didn't know whether everything in your list was odorless, but 15 feet wouldn't help anybody with the spread of odor. So I know that needs to be looked at much more closely. And, in section 6, proposal 6, eating and drinking needs to be separated from those other uses that you put it in, because the other uses, bike repair and rental, art studio, furniture stores, have absolutely none of the issues that eating and drinking establishments have. I mean, there's nothing that connects them. I mean, we have so many eating and drinking establishments in our community board that we have 2 SLA committees that meet each month, and we're there for 5 hours in each committee because it's so busy. So that just seems to me completely outside of reality and should definitely be separated. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. I'll just mention that, even though we're sort of collapsing multiple different categories into a single category, in this instance, use group 6, in many cases, eating and drinking establishments will still be regulated differently. It's mostly what we're trying to do is to sort of rationalize these use groups so that uses that are similar and tend to locate in similar areas.
I understand you're trying to do that. I'm disagreeing with you. I'm saying there's absolutely no similarity in a bike repair shop and an SLA application for a new bar. There's no connection, especially because these are much quieter and they don't bring in hundreds of people. I mean, there's just absolutely no logic to it. You really need to go back and rethink that one and take a look at, stop by one of our committee meetings, SLA or LCLA committee meetings 1 month, and you'll see for yourself how it would be, there's no connection. That definitely should not be in the same group.
I hear what you're saying. So it's like right now eating and drinking establishments are in use group 6, and we're making a collapse of other
Yeah, I'm saying that you
happening
can't
use group,
collapse
but it
them
should
together.
be, it should be its own use group. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan, for that. I actually also want to kind of add on a question on top of that, or concern is hand in hand with that. I think proposal 11, we're talking about home-based businesses, and the slide for that I think is it shows kind of like a very nondescript or easy kind of home business. Someone doing like a podcast or a vlogging at home. But if this proposal actually is going to just eliminate the list of prohibited businesses, I think that does need to be kind of looked at more carefully, because this would basically allow, it really blurs the line between residential use and business use. And, it's not just 3 employees. I think we also need to look at what is the enhanced traffic that's going to happen with a business, right? So a business has people coming in, going for having meetings. So, we may be talking about 3 full-time employees, but that doesn't address anything about, how many people can maybe come in and out during the day in a residential building. And then also, this could be multiplied by potentially every unit in a residential building. There's really no cap, it sounds like, the way that it's written, right? There's a cap for each resident, 3 employees and a certain size of their home. But within a building, it looks like unless there's maybe in the details, but it looks like there's no overall cap on what percentage of a building can have a home business. Could it be 100?
Yeah, you're right. There currently is no overall cap on a building, and there wouldn't be under this proposal.
Yeah. All right, thanks. And I think there was also a question from the chat that I noticed. With the Soho NoHo rezoning, are we considered an M1, an M district at this point, or a special purpose district?
It's actually an M and residential district, right?
Yeah, they're paired districts, so they allow sort of the broadest range of uses.
Okay. Yeah, it's like a big change on top of a change that we're still absorbing from the rezoning, which is a fairly major rezoning.
But it did not eliminate the manufacturing that was there.
So it is still technically considered. So in our looking at this, we should consider that as an M district, right?
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Donna?
Yeah, thank you, Eugene. I just want to follow up on your statements with proposal 11, saying I don't see any restriction in the hours of this. And you mentioned barbershops, hair salons, people can come and go all day and night. There are a lot of fumes with hair salons. So, how are you considering all of those elements?
Yeah, so I think it's also important to mention here that, the zoning is a baseline, and individual buildings, whether they be condos or co-ops, are absolutely free to institute their own.
But what if it's just a
regulations.
regular tenement building with people in there that don't have a condo board or a co-op board? Because this isn't just saying this is for them. This is saying this is across the board for everyone, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
No, that's true. And I don't believe there are hours of operation restrictions in the zoning itself.
And especially just also when you go into those older buildings, not the modern new buildings that are well built and well insulated, everything travels through every wall and under every doorway in there, all the sound, all the fumes and all of that. And I think that really needs to be considered, because there are a lot of people that live in old buildings in our district and a number of other districts.
That's well taken.
Great, thank you. I have one question that I also want to ask about use groups. I forget which proposal this is under, but does this mean that use group 6A is going away? Is essentially everything being collapsed and simplified? And I guess it's under proposal 6, yes.
Right. Yes, I don't think that we're going to have those distinctions that we have today, like 6A, 6B, 6C.
Okay.
I think they're all going to be collapsed. And I think the major difference is, you know, for let's say a C1 where you go into the zoning resolution and it sort of lists all of the, you know, laundry list of use groups that are allowed there, that list would just become shorter because we're sort of collapsing the uses into a single use group.
Got it. Thanks. Carter?
Yeah, I want to go back to something that Michael raised, which is really the impact aspect of this, which are performance standards, right? And by not really including discussion or extensive discussion about the performance standards of some of these, that's where the impacts come from, because certain businesses have much greater impacts, you know, through the performance aspects of them. And that goes for us, it goes to noise, right? You know, in a performance standard of a bar, the noise, and that, you know, that's one of our normal things, that you may have an allowable use on the ground floor in a tenement building, but the result of having different styles of businesses, you know, you will have different impacts on the residents upstairs, and bars and restaurants have a much different performance standard impact than a retail store, for example. So these are some of the conflicts. And then as well as, you know, second floor commercial, for example, where there are few places that we do have that, which are vestiges of some older zoning. Those second floor residential or those second floor commercial units are accessed through the residential hallways in many of those cases. And that just seems, we already know those create problems. And so when you talk about separation, I'm not sure what that, you know, how that comes into play, because you take up so much square footage to create a separate entrance for the commercial only to that second floor, as opposed to, you know, where now the problem is that the residential bells are all at the ground floor, plus whoever's going to the business gets rung in some cases, or those bells, you have to walk up the stairs so that anybody can walk into the building during business hours. Anyway, those are just pointing out some of the issues. And then lastly, you had said from Susan's question with the growing of, with growing marijuana, with the smells, et cetera, that's actually left to the city. The zoning regulations govern where you can do that activity, not to the state. The state only licenses after the city has set up the zoning. So to put the onus on the state is actually incorrect. The state relies on the city to create the zoning where that can occur. And that's actually outlined very specifically in the regulations as far as where can this activity take place. And that is then directed to the zoning regulations. It's not the other way around. So I think that is something, just an example of a type of growing that has a side product, which is a performance standard, which is a smell, right? And so the performance standards, a lot of this all just keeps going back to that. And even in David's case, you know, the performance standards of a lot of deliveries, right? You know, I don't know if that's an actual performance standard. I know that smells, right, noise, et cetera, are. So I just go back to that because it seems that these proposals sort of lack a registration of those other impacts. And I'm just wondering if you can discuss that, because and you really got me going when you said, no, it's up to the state to license where you can grow marijuana. It's actually up to the city to give those rules, not the state. The state only licenses the activity. They don't determine where that can take place. The city does.
Right. And to respond to just that specific point, I think I was I think Susan, I believe it was Susan, was asking, you know, with this proposal, will you be able to suddenly be able to grow marijuana if your zoning district allows it? And that's not the case. Like you would need both the zoning and you would need the license from the state to be able to operate your marijuana business. So I understand what you're saying, that it's sort of a chicken or the egg sort of scenario, that the city zoning sort of
It's
creates
not a chicken or egg. It's not. It's very specific that the cities can set up their own zoning regulations where these activities would take place, whether that's for the sale, that's outlined in the municipality rulemaking, which would be the city. The city allows where, through zoning, where those activities can take place. The farming, growing, interior growing, that's laid out by the city zoning regulations. It's not a chicken or egg. That's the first thing. Can you be there? It's not
Right.
the other way around.
I think my point is still true, is that even with this proposal, you can't automatically open a marijuana growing business. It doesn't enable you to do that.
I think it's a
Right.
good point. You know, obviously the state only recently legalized marijuana. We didn't have marijuana in our zoning resolution, and we don't intend to do so. We are clarifying the rules on where agriculture is written in it, but we're not distinguishing it through either. And I think we just want to make the point, you know, what Andy's saying is the state is the one that will be licensing you a lot. You know, you'll have to go through a lot of hoops and meet various performance standards to get those licenses to do that activity. So we're kind of lining up the zoning with where it can happen.
But I guess it's just not, to me, it just doesn't seem like you're taking in the performance standard aspect, which is the smell and the noise, right? Those are big things in activities, and it goes to the heart of so many of the comments that you hear.
Exactly, it's the center of all the points.
You know, it's all performance standard related, because I don't think there's a lot of disagreement on some of these proposed changes, and it's a good step forward. It's the impacts. And it's the impacts that are measured through the performance standard. And that's where all the pushback will originate from in almost every single case, is the impacts. And I just bring that up because we have a lot of experience, because we have so many old buildings here that have non-conforming uses, and we see the allowable uses in those non-conforming uses have changed the same way, you know, everything else. And so we see those impacts. And, you know, whether that be a bakery that's in a lower C zone, whether that be a, you know, bar that's in the middle of a residential district, and it all comes back to noise and smells and, you know, those types of things. And that's where the impacts go away. So a corner store, you know, for example, there's no distinction whether that's a small neighborhood bar or a corner store if the use groups aren't defined clearly. And, you know, the performance standards, of course, in you know, whether is that a problem or not? So I'll stop on that, but I just don't see any discussion of that in any of this, and that seems to be the helpful guidepost to opening this up to broader uses.
Thank you, Carter. Pete, it looks like you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Do you have a map showing where use group 1 is allowed?
Use
In
group
community
one
board
or use group one or proposal one?
Proposed future use group number 1, agriculture and open uses.
We do not have that with us, but that's something we can provide for you.
Okay, is there any place in CB2 where use group 1 is allowed now or proposed to be allowed?
I'm not sure of that, Pete, but we can get
Okay,
back to you.
if you could let us know, that would be interesting because we do have agriculture / cannabis growing happening right now under a license that is supposed to be connected with a university or science something, but is seemingly being allowed in a whole different way with no enforcement. Could you go to the slide that shows nightlife? Great.
This one or the next one?
Yeah, back one, yeah, here where it's mentioned that mend is the answer to conflicts. And that somewhere, one of your slides mentions that mend, which is the mediation service, which basically means that if you're a resident and are impacted by a business, you get to go to mediation, which means you're already halfway to being told the answer is you got to live with it, rather than an enforcement situation. So I noticed that in all of your presentation, residents are not mentioned. You mentioned residential, but in many cases, it is a new imposition on residential rather than new protections for residents. And I'm curious how DCP views the economic importance of owner-occupied residential property in this whole picture.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. That's a really good question. And, you know, I think with any regulation, any zoning regulation, any rule, we are sort of constantly striving to figure out what the appropriate balance is between the priorities and the interests of residents and the priority and interests of businesses in the economy.
Okay, but Andy, as I mentioned, nothing in what you presented tonight shows any effort towards balancing in the direction of residents. In fact, this thing where you talk about the mixing of uses, it says if you're going to have commercial next to or above residents, there has to be a 15-foot buffer. Well, your diagram shows residential, new commercial right up next to residential on the same floor. How do you create a buffer if you're abutting the different use?
Yeah, I think that diagram is simplified for visual purposes, just to make it easier to understand.
Okay, so if that is a simplified and inaccurate diagram, how do you create that 15-foot buffer?
If it's on the same level, there would have to be 15 feet diagonally. So basically 2 walls separating the commercial use from the residential use.
And if that didn't exist, that would be a violation and therefore actionable?
If it didn't meet the zoning, then it would be non-compliant and you could call 311.
And what is the process that one would have to go through to assure enforcement of the zoning under this new plan?
It wouldn't change. So today, if you know a member of the community or someone noticed a non-compliance or non-conformance issue and wanted to report it, they would absolutely be empowered to call 311 and avail themselves of the other processes that are out there.
Having done that in my life, Andy, do you realize how long that takes to even attempt enforcement when there's non-compliant situations?
I'd just like to point out, this is a really good point, and we're going to take all this back. That proposal is mostly amongst renovating or building in new construction. So it'd have to have a site plan with the Department of Buildings before it could be approved. It's affecting renovations and new construction. I imagine CB2 is an area where we just have a lot of like existing non-compliant issues, which is what I think you're referring to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
With no enforcement and nobody cares. Because it's been determined, as your document shows, that commercial is more important than residential.
I don't think that our document shows that.
Well, like I
Commercial is
said,
more
how many
important than
times do you mention
residential.
residents in your documents? Anyway, I appreciate the time. There's a lot of stuff in here that really needs a lot more thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Do we have any other questions from the committee? Raise your hands. I'm not seeing any.
Oh, I
Okay.
actually do. I have one more question.
Yes, Susan. Actually, Susan,
Susan's
Katie, why don't
already-
you go and then we'll go to Katie, why don't we do
Let-
you and then we'll go to Susan.
Okay, thank you. In your, I know the community board too, and a large number of other community boards from around the city have requested a longer review period because this is an enormous task for an all-volunteer group to do within the allotted time. And I did notice when you were talking that you said there was response date flexibility. Could you expand? That's very, this is not specific. This is not a specific response, but it's helpful. I flagged it, and I think it could be helpful. But I'd like to have a little. If you could expand on it, that'd be helpful. Great.
Sure. So, because this is technically a non-ULURP application, it's just a text amendment. It's not a map amendment or a special permit. It doesn't technically have to adhere to that city charter mandated time clock. So the commission does have a little bit more flexibility to accept recommendations later than that 60 days. So the commission will accept your input and your formal recommendations up to the vote, which hasn't been calendared yet and isn't typically calendared until much late, like after the public hearing. But you can expect that would be probably in mid to late February based on how things are typically spaced out. But I still would encourage you to get your recommendation in as soon as possible, because the commission, us, the borough president, the city council, they do start reviewing them as soon as they do come in. The commission does actually read these. So the sooner you get it in, the more time that they actually have to digest your feedback.
Thank you.
And I would say that, this is our expected timeline of it, but there are things that change, and it could happen further than that. So you're not limited again to that 60-day review. Like if the public hearing were to get pushed back at all, that gives you more time. But to Andy's point, I think it would be good to get it in.
Understood.
Okay. And then Susan.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify for you why I think Pete made the comment that this was more residents weren't being taken into consideration. When you began your presentation, you specifically said that the point of this was because zoning needed to be updated to help small business owners, and that the current zoning gets in the way for businesses, and to make sure the zoning works for the economy, not against it. And that is nothing we're disputing or debating, but wasn't really, residential tenants weren't certainly prioritized. And that's why I brought up the comment earlier about the 15 feet, which was completely not taking into consideration, people's lives, residential people's lives. Anyway, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because it was what you, excuse me, specifically said.
That's point taken. That's good point. I get it.
Question, if I may. In your introduction, you said there would be another set of proposals relating to residential use. Can you give us an idea of what we can expect to hear with that?
So that will be the City of Yes for housing opportunity.
Oh.
And there's actually already a website on the DCP webpage with a lot of background information. I believe our first info session has already been posted, if I'm not mistaken. But that proposal will be, focused on how do we create more housing across the city.
And does that relate to,
go ahead.
Does that relate to commercial uses or not? Is it only new residents or conversion? Or is it too soon to say?
It's too soon to speculate. There may be proposals that relate to commercial regulations, but it'll be primarily focused on housing.
This text amendment is more focused on commercial districts. That one will be more focused on residential districts. There's likely to be a proposed, information in it on converting commercial buildings to residential buildings. There'll likely be some updates to that, but just some points on that text amendment that will be going through, that will have an EIS. So there'll be a public scoping for that and a long sort of 9-month to a year study on that before it goes to ULURP. So they were spaced in a way that, communities weren't getting all three at once. So that will be entering ULURP likely well after this has had its public hearing and city council vote.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Andy and Ben, I see that there's two separate ZAP portal locations for this. Could you kind of explain for the committee what which ones we should focus on, why there's two? It looks like one is focused on M districts, but that's kind of, it's the first I've seen that there's, two separate entries in ZAP.
Yeah, so there are actually two applications. The first application contains proposals 1 through 17. And the second proposal is only focused on the creation of these new M districts and C8 districts. So it's only proposal 18 that's contained in that second application. Ben, I don't know if you know why we spun that off into its own application.
Yeah, we're not mapping these districts. We're just creating them in the zoning resolution. So they would still go through an EIS and ULURP for a text amendment to actually physically map them. So it's creating these new zoning districts for future job hubs. And to be honest, I don't think this proposal would really affect CB2, but certainly we want your feedback and thoughts on it. Regardless, it's a citywide text amendment. So
okay, so yeah, you're saying that it doesn't look like there's like an intersection between what we have in CB2 and proposal 18. Is that, am I?
Yeah, this is more looking at upzoning the sort of remaining like IBZ districts.
Okay. All right.
Not upzoning as much as it's creating.
Changing.
There's a lot of M11 districts, so they're no longer competitive as manufacturing districts. because of the low FAR. And so we
Mhm.
would allow basically to recreate our ability to build things like the Soho loft buildings that have been successful in these other districts. That's sort of the thinking behind it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just saw that there was like, I think on the Zap portal, it's like another 1,400 page EAS for, I guess, proposal 18 alone. So wanted to just kind of limit our look at what we need to go through. Okay. Thank you. Are there any other committee questions? Obviously, there is a lot of material to cover.
If you have any questions on accessing any of that information, feel free to ask us.
Mhm.
And what's a little different about this proposal than ones in the past is we're breaking out sort of the proposals on a checklist. And so the community board could respond on, if there's ones you're okay with, you can click yes, we're okay with this. If there's ones that you'd, particularly dislike, you can click no and provide feedback on each.
Okay.
So it is a lot of work, but it allows you to give a nuance on your votes and feedback to us.
And then
And we could distribute that checklist to you as well.
Yeah, that would be great if you could distribute that, and we'll send that out to our committee. And for the ones that don't have any impact on us, I guess we can just ignore. I think there's one I noted, it might have been the life science one. Didn't look like didn't look like that impacted us from your presentation.
I mean,
Okay.
it in all likelihood probably won't affect CB2, but it is sort of expanding the special permit applicability for commercial labs, which would apply to zoning districts that do exist in CB2. So I would encourage you not to just ignore it.
Okay.
Just the intention behind it is really like the major hospitals look to co-locate research around them, and they, sometimes look at buildings around the hospitals for these sort of clean lab spaces, and we don't have it. So we've been losing this industry to the
As a
greater
city.
region. So it's to give us flexibility. It's definitely not going to probably likely be located all over the city, but yeah, to Andy's point, we should look
Don't
in.
ignore it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions. So if that is the case, I would like to.
And sorry, Eugene, just to make one last point to close everything out. It would be, we've been taking notes, but it would be helpful if, all the committee members, if you wanted to compile and consolidate your questions and comments, and send those to us, that would be helpful so that we can get you answers to those as soon as possible.
Okay, so I think, yeah, we've done this in the past where we'll compile, I guess, a list of our questions and then funnel it to you, Andy. So it'll come from Katie and myself, and we'll also involve our chair, our district manager, Mark, to help coordinate that. But we'll get those questions to you and help coordinate the responses that come back. And I'm sure we'll have some other questions that didn't come up in this session that we'll have in the future. So thank you very much. I do want to thank you for the time in putting this together and presenting this to us. I do want to echo that there's a lot of material to cover. And so, we will do our best to look over this the next 30, 60 days and go through all of this. And I expect that we will be in communication with you about questions that come up. But thank you so much for pulling this together. And again, just any other questions from the committee before I wrap up the meeting? No? Okay, great. So on behalf of the Land Use Committee and CB2, thank you very much, Andy and Ben, for coming and joining us today.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thanks for hosting us.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Good night, everyone.